If we can, let's call to order the Administrative Services Committee for the city to address the ordinance that we have before us, and I forgot the number already, but it's called the Vacant Structure Registry, which we've met on once before. There seem to be some still questions after the last council meeting and pre-council meeting where we were kind of looking over this, and we decided to come back to committee to look at a few things. I'd like to pick up where we left off. But before we do that, I've had several questions and several people call me over the last 5 days asking bunches of questions about this, but I've had two property owners who've called who had very big questions about this. So I said today that I will allow 5 minutes for the property owner to address us before we actually got started. Mr. Townsend is sitting in the back here, and if you'd like to come to the podium and discuss some possible issues that you may have with the council before we actually get through this. Some of the things I think we've already addressed, but it'd be nice if they could hear from you. Please take the podium up there and hit the mic and talk to us about your concerns.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. I didn't know I'd get to go first. This is great. I'm a property licensed unlimited general contractor in Alabama. I've got 2 properties in downtown Mobile, 5 total in the Broad Street Loop. 2 everybody's happy about. They're developed out. One was developed in 2003. It's 459 Dolphin Street. It's a historic tax credit project. It's fully rented. It's doing great. The other is a lot. And then there's 3 buildings that are tied up. One is a regulatory issue. The building's too big. It's also in downtown Mobile. We're caught in the if you have over 99 occupancy, you have to go before the planning commission. We've tried 3 times. And really, to kind of back up, I think it's a great idea, my personal opinion, to have a registry for vacant buildings and hold people accountable, if that's the right word, but at least a little bit of additional pressures. There's a cost to Mobile. There's a cost to the citizens that these buildings aren't being developed out. And then it's like how to tweak some of the wording so it doesn't go too far. I've only been on it for about a day, but the large building that we can't get developed, that we've been denied 3 times since 2014, is about 50, this as written, and Mr. Carroll was great. We talked for 20 minutes yesterday. He went through line by line and kind of got me on the right track for some of the things that I was reading. But my quick read is our initial outlay would be $1,000 or $1,500 for the registration. It'd be the insurance is like $3,000 to $4,000. This is every year. The fire monitoring is about $10,000. That's initial. The electrical, once there's a comment in there about, and this goes to, could I please humbly suggest some language? That this is all I'm asking for in this whole thing, because some of them, when you take them out into how they can be interpreted, it can get expensive quick. So we're looking at $15,000 on one building every year. No, I'm sorry, initial, and then about $6,000 to $7,000. That's for a 10,000 square foot building. I love the idea of registering. And then kind of jumping aside, one of the buildings, 2 of the buildings we have are from the Hoffman fire. We purchased them after the fire. They did substantial damage to our building, and I would be happy to speak on anything about that, but I don't think anything in here would actually have prevented it, because poor Mr. Hoffman had been deceased and the estate wasn't really actively managing the property. So they had more property than they knew what to do with. The city had they had done everything regulatory that they could do. And then it just wasn't, the enforcement was the city was taking charge of the building. There was a big hole in the back. I have a picture of it because we commented on it for 5 years. And great, I didn't bring it. I'll show it when I leave. But it was a hole that was never covered and apparently a vagrant got in and caught it on fire. And there's nothing in here that would ever prevent that from happening. So I'd love to get a chance to just suggest some language to tone down some of the total costs, because I can quickly get to what these costs are. And then I'm all for the registration.
Excuse me, question. I really appreciate you coming down here. The number that you have on the monitoring for the fire alarm, $10,000, is that per year?
No, that's the initial. That includes, there's language in there that says, and if it relies on, I'm paraphrasing, relies on electrical, then the electrical must meet Mobile code. That would involve, a lot of people have maybe 5-10-year-old panels, which we do because we haven't. And by the way, and Mr. Carroll and I talked about this, if you're a developer trying to get a tax credit, there's a requirement that you have to spend all this money in 5 years. So Mr. McNair, okay, he can confirm this. The National Park Service tax credit, you've got to spend it all in 5 years, and we've been kind of forced to spend pretty good chunks of money because we can't get one of our buildings approved. So we know that our electrical needs to be upgraded. But we don't really want to make that spend until we have the bigger project approved, because we can get it captured in the tax credit, which pays all the investors off better. More people want to come to Mobile and do more developments when we get rewarded for being smart with how we spent the money. So does that answer the question? So it's about the 10,000 includes probably 3,000 to 5,000 in electrical. And that's a very quick number. I'm only had about 24 hours to look at it. I apologize. But.
Okay, and you said that's per year or one time?
One time, and then that's probably 6,000 to 8,000 per year. The insurance was like 3,000 to 4,000. The registration was, which is kind of a good idea. I mean, I'm torn. If this went just as it would, a lot of times the things you don't like ended up being wonderful, and maybe it causes a lot of Mobilians to fix their properties up, and maybe that's a plus. But so I kind of didn't like the graduated schedule you all had. You had it 1,500, then the next year it was 2,000, 3,000. But then again, that's adding some pressure to people to get out there. One thing we thought about, and I'll get this to you, in some language you can look at, is maybe rebate back for developers that actually do it. We're tied up on the Hoffman buildings. The engineer we originally hired did not want to do anything other than tear the whole buildings down. So we had to find an engineer who had dealt with historic. Mr. McNair, I'm sure, can attest to this. The design professionals, if that's not in their forte, they don't like looking at 150-year-old brick that got burned and making a load-bearing decision on it. So we had to switch out engineers. That slowed us down tremendously on those two projects, but we're not really worried about two of them. It's the third building that is still hung up where it's too big for the area. We can't get it approved, and we're going to probably continuously be dinged. But anyway, the 1,500, 2,500, 3,500, that graduated scale, if you could get it all back, if you got the buildings developed, if you had some exceptions, and Mr. Offenbach and I were talking about it, and it sounds like y'all are on that road.
Well, I've talked to him about it. I also talked to Paul Carbo about it last week, and other people here. But when I read these revisions, it's still not in here. So when you told me last night that it wasn't here, it's still not here, even though we have talked about it. I asked for the same language that's in nuisance abatement when the developer can provide a schedule to the city as to when certain things are happening. And as long as the developer is making progress towards those, then the developer is not fined. But as of right now, in the world that in the world that you live in, then you would constantly be fined if those things were not done or scheduled because of delays in the project that we can't attest for or we can't see. So there needs to be some language there, and I agree with that. And I think that David has agreed to that already, and I think some other people may have too. I haven't talked to everybody, but I agree with you there. Is there anything in this, though, that if you could not meet the 4-year time span, if you were a smaller developer, would cause you to have to sell the property? because of the way the fee structure is set up. And you,
Oh, yeah.
you know you're going to get there, but because the way the fee structure is set up is forcing you to get rid of or sell your property. And that's the thing that I'm most concerned about. Could you talk to that, please?
Well, and my business partner and I talked about it because we're both kind of on board with it. Tightened language and exceptions, but then to talk to your point, it seems to me like if you could hit a sweet spot of cost to the building owner of like $1,000 to $3,000 a year, that's where you want to be. This 10,000 starts to get, you may end up with a lot of city lean buildings, and a lot of fights. And once you get into code issues like mentioning the fire monitoring, you and I, we talked in Wordsmith, there's a difference between fire suppression, fire monitoring, and that's definitely true. And the suppression costs a lot more. That's the sprinklers and things, but just the monitoring, you've got to have new equipment. The folks, there's 3 or 4 guys in Mobile, good guys, but they know the code and they will make sure you spend the money it takes to meet the code, and it will push it up pretty quick. Anyway, that's my thought, is the sweet spot would be $1,000 to $3,000.
And that's everything, including the monitoring and bring it up to code.
You won't get there with the monitoring. That would push you up substantially over. You start getting into code compliance issues on a building that really never had an architect and funding come in and actually do a proper project. It was kind of piecemealed in.
Yeah. I didn't articulate that very well the last time we met. I mean, it's almost impossible to bring the electrical up to code and then have all the wiring run right, knowing that you're going to have to tear it all out to redo the building.
See,
and that's a big cost too that you have to consider. Now, if the city, and I'm talking so that everybody's hearing me, if the city would be amenable to an electrical system that was powered or powered to a point to where you're not bringing everything up to the IBC, then and have it work where it was monitored, I think that may be okay too. But how do we do that? And that would have to be under the discretion of the code enforcement officers and how we get there. And that would have to be written into this some kind of way to make sure that we're not inadvertently causing a lot of cost to the developers or to the builders or the property owners. But we do need a system that's monitored. There's no way it cannot not have power, because if it doesn't, then we couldn't monitor it, couldn't call the fire department. And I prefer a system that calls the fire department direct or the police department direct, as opposed to having to do that. No systems are now wireless. Now, on the insurance part of it, I mean, once we buy property, as developers, we're required by our own insurance companies to immediately put insurance on the buildings when we own them. Yeah, right. That's if we mortgage them. So we're immediately required to have general liability and insurance on the building. So the developer should already have those, unless it's a property owner that has had a building forever, that doesn't have a mortgage on it, that's just refusing to do it. And I think that's more directed at a property owner that has owned the building forever and does not have a mortgage on it, who just refuses to do that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because you're kind of looking for other clues that whether or not an owner is ever going to do something to the property.
That's correct.
And
right.
so I got you. I would just say, because you don't always have to fire sprinkler, you don't always have to fire monitor. This with projects. Some of the small buildings, I think it's like 75 feet. If you can get someone to an exit in 75 feet, you don't have to fire sprinkler. You have to have exits in certain locations. The hallways, the stairs have to be certain widths.
Right. That all goes to finished product though. But I think they address the smaller buildings versus the larger buildings on the fee schedule. Now the council has discretion on the fee schedule, and I think we may need to look at that in some kind of way.
Well, I was just saying, just to finish, and I'll be done, that the fire monitoring may never need to go in some of these buildings, the smaller buildings. So they would be a smaller building tasked with fire monitoring. If they actually do the development, they may have never needed to fire monitor that building. That was my point.
Chief, what do you think? That's correct. And So, okay, I got you. That's correct. So that wording, do we need to include that wording in here about the smaller buildings that he's talking about now? Because I understand what he's saying, but last week there was nobody else in here to back me up. So I'm understanding, and I'm asking you now: does that language need to be included in this in this ordinance?
Yes, sir. So that is correct. There's certain occupancy types based on the assembly, if it's a business that requires, and then the number of occupancies in that would require a fire monitoring or a sprinkler system. So there's different variations to that with the code itself. But I think the intent of this ordinance is to, if that building is vacant, you have to have a monitoring system in there because there's nobody there to let you know that there would be a fire. Whereas a smaller business that is occupied, most people are going to get out and they're going to notice that there was a fire in that building. Does that make sense?
It says required by the International Fire Code 2020 edition 901.6 and NFPA 72. So that would meet that exemption under that rule anyways.
And just one other thing to go back with the vacant structures with the Hoffman furniture, that in section 52-209, it talks about number one, the vacant structures being secured all the way around so that those holes would not be in the building. And that this ordinance would have helped correct that one incident.
Aren't we also required under nuisance abatement to secure properly the entire building under the same statute and not just this?
No.
one? So we're
No.
not nuisance abatement when we have the city, when we have these properties, they don't have to be 100% secured.
We are not required as the city to do so.
No. I'm talking about the owner. The city can require the owner to.
That
Of the
yes,
property.
yes,
So
sir.
that under nuisance abatement, the city can require the owners to do the same thing that we're requesting here and completely have the building totally secured.
So when you say aren't we required, you're talking about
Oh,
owners.
Yes, we're requiring the owners to have the building secure.
That is correct. The city is requiring owners within the Hank Aaron Loop to do so, and under nuisance abatement, generally, that's for the entire city.
That's
So,
right.
yes.
But we already have an ordinance in place that requires them to do that, is what I'm saying. Outside of this new ordinance, there are laws that we can already enforce that would have prevented that if we had known there was a hole in the back and it was reported and it goes to the proper channels, then that could have been issued for the building to be properly secured under nuisance abatement.
So I will tell you this: two things. One, generally, nuisance abatement does require such, but that is not unique to vacant buildings. How we enforce, it's not unique to vacant buildings. I mean, if it's anywhere, we have to secure.
That's exactly that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's
Right.
exactly. So there's already ordinances on the books that we could be using and enforcing, and there are others that we also could be using and enforcing. Now, I'm not saying that we're not going to incorporate it into this, but I'm saying that we already have ordinances that we could be using to prevent what he was talking about.
So the short answer is not all the time. So no, but I'll let Mr. Roberts.
Actually, fire department can cover this more, but the one of the primary focuses of this ordinance would be that a lot of downtown buildings are under different code. 1950s code, 1970s code, 2000 code. This standardizes the fire requirement for all buildings downtown.
Correct. And again, just because the building is now vacant, and if that next door neighbor has a building code because they have not upgraded anything past 50% of the value of the property, now their building code and fire code is reduced because they don't have to meet that based on the building type. But a neighbor that comes in, does a remodel of that complete building, they're going to have to increase to that fire code that meets the current level. And I know that probably goes against with what some of this is looking at, but the intent of what the ordinance is to get that early detection, because when it comes down to life safety for the firefighters or for the civilians, when we get the early detection, that's what's going to benefit the citizens. And it also can reduce the property loss to the downtown area. With the Hoffman furniture, with that building fire, we were very, blessed to have a quick response and great crews that got down there and put it out quickly and did not get the entire block. So what says that happened, I believe, 9 o'clock. So there was a lot of activity down there. You know, in the middle of the night when things can go a lot longer is when this is going to be more beneficial.
Councilman, good afternoon. There's a few points I wanted to address as well that are already in the ordinance, the draft version that addresses some of the concerns from the property owner. If you turn to page 3, section C, you see number 2 there, buildings under construction or property that in the reasonable determination of the code official is being actively renovated, rehabilitated, et cetera. So we put that in there because of many of the reasons that you heard today, because rehabilitating historic property, especially one that's been vacant for upwards of 10, 20, some of these properties up to 50 or more years. It's slow, it's complicated, and it's expensive, and we appreciate that. So you've got to look at it from the perspective of life safety, which you're going to hear a lot about today, but you're also going to hear about personal responsibility, but we don't want to penalize people. So the gentleman brought up that maybe they don't have a tenant yet, but they're working on it. They've applied for tax credits, state and federal. There's a process there. Those are exactly the kind of things addressed in number 2 under section C, where the code enforcement division can, if there's proof of that activity, then that is proof of progress. That is proof that they're actively working on the project. They're actively searching for funds, incentives. They're working with an architect. They have drawings. Maybe they've been to the ARB. Those are the kind of things we're looking for, because we're not trying to catch anybody here. We're trying to encourage economic development in a way that is beneficial for the downtown, but also beneficial for life safety. Those are the 2 kind of ways to look at this.
Thank you, Mr. McNair. But to get to that point, you may own the building 4 years before you ever get there. And that's the point that we're trying to establish. As Mr. Townsend has stated, he's on the building now for a year, maybe 2, but he doesn't have his first drawing done. He doesn't have all that stuff done, but he has planned to put together his capital stack to get everything together. But in the meantime, we're going to be fining him and penalizing him as he gets prepared to get the project done. He's purchased the project, but now he's trying to raise the funds for it. Now, what I suggested 2 weeks ago is that we add the language that allows a developer or owner to put a schedule together the same way they would doing nuisance abatement. If we're going to tear down a building, to say, hey, here's how much time we allotted ourselves to get our capital stack together. Here's how much time we allowed for an architect. Here's how much time we've allowed to go to planning. Here's how much time we allowed to do this. But that language currently in there for the time proceeding the purchase of the building. I mean, in between the time he has the building and his plan is ready. So we would be penalizing him or any other person for that time in between him being able to get ready to go and having everything in place.
So I'm glad you brought that up. If you continue reading the number 2 there, it's an 18-month window of reprieve. And there's many of those that we've baked into here, because to your point, which is no arguments at all. It's a slow process. We want to give people the ability to get their financing, to find their tenants, to market a property without coming after them. And there's 2 ways to do that. Number 1, all the reprieves in here that we've baked in, depending on the circumstances of the new property owner. But also, this can go to the discretion of the code enforcement official. And should the property owner disagree with that, they can always apply to the city council for further reprieve. Now, I do want to bring one thing to your attention. There was a note that was given to us that we did include. You mentioned kind of a schedule. If you look at page 2, and this is number 10, plan for maintenance. So at the request of the council's last meeting, we did include this, a formal strategy and detailed document that outlines the specific tasks required for materials, tools, procedures needed to keep the building maintained according to, and that'll be the ordinance put in there. So we've definitely heard you on this. These are the ones that we address that, because to your point, everything needs to be very clear because everybody's situation is very different.
One quick thing to also add to number 5, when it talks about the power source for the monitoring system, and I'm not sure if he was looking at an upgrade to the entire building itself, but that could be something temporary as far as just having to power that alarm system. But there also are, and I've got our community risk reduction members looking into this, but there are some variations with solar. So even getting creative with a battery system with the solar backup, now you've eliminated the need to have the electric added to that. So that could be a variation to this, and it gets back to the warding. But additionally, now you're talking about a cellular system fire monitoring service with just a solar backup and the battery backup itself with the technology, the way it's expanding so rapidly. That would be a better choice than providing power to the buildings themselves.
So question, are you saying that, and this is so that everyone can hear this, that a temporary pole or box with a meter that is to code inside the building would be suffice? With just one piece of conduit running to the system, the fire would be okay?
That's correct.
Meaning that you don't have to do the whole building.
Correct.
That is what you're saying here.
Yes, sir.
That's understood. Okay. I'm fine with that.
Come to the microphone if you don't mind.
Because that's a great, and that's some of the example, like just putting the wordsmithing right, just doing a temporary would be wonderful.
Temporary
And-
pole
yeah,
to
and the
code.
electrician isn't bound by the new code,
And-
all the way.
And additionally, we do have the ability to, with the code itself, to make some variances with this ordinance. As far as, NFPA might not mention the solar, but if they can provide that it provides the battery backup, that the power is sufficient, we have that ability to approve that as our code officials with the fire side for something like that to happen.
Did the wording in the ordinance, I'm trying to read it real quick. Did the wording in the ordinance, and I don't remember reading like that, it says electrical up to code. It does not say a temporary pole or source up to code. Can we change
Yeah,
that
I
wording?
think it's covered, David, and we're checking, but yeah, I think we're good. Under A5 on page 8, it's the system shall be supported by a dedicated power source. It's talking about the fire system, the monitoring system. If the power source is electrical, it must comply with city's electrical code. So it's talking about that one run to supply power to that fire system.
Well, city's
Sorry.
electrical code isn't very clear. That could be.
But it's
No.
talking about the power source though, of that fire monitoring.
So we
system.
just need to put
Yeah.
code for the power source as
Right.
opposed to
Well,
Paul.
for the fire monitoring system.
Right, for the Paul, can we make that change in there so we'll know?
This is like, when you mention this is something everybody should definitely hear. So on the Hoffman buildings, those are a time capsule. They never had electrical. They never had indoor plumbing. We were amazed. They were, original fireplaces, that's how they heated. So when we talk to Alabama Power about, and this is part of the design, we have to run brand new power to that building. That, just doing that. So just keep this in mind. If and we'll be fine on those buildings. I'm just giving you things to think about. You may get some pushback from some other, because there are very old properties downtown that have never been electrified. So, or plumbing. So it was about $12,000 the developer has to pay for to get Alabama Power to dig up the street to run a 5-inch line, 2 of them, into our buildings. So just keep that in mind with the temporary, as you may have.
Well, that cost wouldn't be incurred with the temporary pole. Your temporary box would just be on site with them getting into it.
No, it would, because there's no electricity.
Yeah.
You'd have to get to the line.
Yeah.
With that particular building, that may be exempt because it's got a 6-month exemption after a fire and then 18-month after acquisition. And then it can also be extended by the code official by reasonable written documentation from the developer.
Yeah, it wouldn't apply to ours. I'm just giving you, on
Right.
very old buildings,
Okay, thank you.
somebody will have to pay to get that power run to the
Yes,
site.
sir. Thank you. Mr. Carbo, if you would just make that one sentence change about the temporary pole and power source to code, just the power source to code right there. That clarifies that. I guess, Steve, you're saying that the schedule that I asked for is covered in that one line without stating that it needs to be a schedule of progress. Meaning that if they're going to go beyond the 1, 2, 3 year before they're ready to actually move forward with their construction, can they give you a schedule that says, here, this is year one, this is where we are, year two, this is where we are, year three, we're moving forward without us finding them $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, $4,000 for, I think it's a 10,000 square foot building.
I think you've got to look at it two ways. First of all, it does cover that, but predicated on action. And so a plan is important, but action is just as important. And that's what we're trying to do here, because if somebody puts a plan together that says that we'll have a tenant by X date, drawings by a certain date, ARB approval, power company, et cetera, and they don't meet those timelines, then we're going to have a problem. Now, if they meet those timelines, then we have a different conversation, because again, we're not trying to go out of our way to find people here. We're trying to work with developers to to get these buildings up to code, to put tenants in there. So if we have a property owner who's acting not only in good faith, but proving their actions, then yes.
Just let me give you one example, and I'm just going to mention the building, the Gayfors building. It's been through one owner that we know who went above and beyond for several years trying to get their financing in place, their drawings in place, their capital stack in place, and all of those things, but it didn't make it to the finish line. The building is vacant. Are you saying that we would have been, and that building is well over 10,000 square feet. So are you saying that we would have been finding that person for every year that they've owned that building, trying to get their development plan in place, but then it falls apart? Is that what you're telling me?
So that is a good example of the type of building that we will be examining, not only for life safety purposes, but also for economic development purposes. Because in that particular case, we're talking about a building that doesn't meet code in any regard when it comes to life safety. That's another good example where the liability insurance comes into play for the safety of the citizens of downtown who not only own buildings adjacent to it, but also walk by that building every day, where you have pieces literally falling into the street. So in that particular case, yes, we would look at that, and there would likely be fines in place, because even though that has been listed, it's been marketed, which we applaud the owners for doing that, there's still time limits here where even if you don't get a tenant, it's not in perpetuity. There are still limitations on, even if you market it, how long there is a grace period. But that is a good example where, we really would like to see something put into that building, and we have no intention of encouraging the owner to sell it unless that's something they want to do. We simply want it to be safe, and we want to see tenants.
Don't you think that, or would it be, don't you think it would be a deterrent to development? We would be running the developers off because we'd be fining them so much money that they wouldn't even want to do the project anymore.
I'm glad you brought up the amount of money. So let's start. Let's kind of start at the beginning on how we came to this process by looking at best practices of other cities. The National League of Cities has documented that over 550 other American cities have a process and a program very similar to this. And so with a lot of fact finding, with a lot of investigation, looking at other cities across the country and other cities in the state of Alabama, that is how we came to this. And I will say that the fines you see here, the fee schedule, you notice that there's different categories, square footage, et cetera. You also notice the timetables we put in with all the buffers and all the time. That is one of the most lenient versions of this that could possibly be introduced when you look at other cities. So we really want this to work, and that's why we want to put in best practices downtown. We want to have the right staffing in place, because again, this is more than simply somebody being punished. That's not the intent. It's about all the reasons you've heard about life safety, and it's about making our downtown what it should be. You hear a lot of arguments. People come and say, "Well, why can't our downtown look a little more like Charleston or another city? Insert city here." It's because they have these strategies, they implement them, and they enforce them. It's not by magic that a lot of those cities don't have blighted buildings, blocks of blighted buildings in their downtown. It's because they have these kind of strategies. So we are one of the last to the table, but we also don't want to come in too heavy. And that's why we want to work with these property owners by making sure the fines are not overly burdensome.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I had a couple questions. One, I know you stated about other cities. Can you you mentioned Charleston. So Charleston have similar prices that they're charging, timelines is higher.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so, and I'm not surprised. When you look at Charleston, which I love visiting Charleston, but the people can't even people who work in Charleston can't live in Charleston. I mean, I think we can learn from Charleston, but at the same thing, I think we can be better than Charleston, making sure that we do it properly. So have we looked at cities that's similar to Mobile?
We have.
Because and what cities? Because Charleston's a little different. I mean,
Sure.
It's similar, but I want people to enjoy the Mobile, who live in Mobile. Charleston, people who work in Charleston don't live downtown. They can't even enjoy it. They have to leave and move and go away to be able to survive financially. So what other cities that are using this system that we can look at
So
that's similar?
the similarities, Birmingham and Auburn are the
Okay.
two in the state of Alabama, because to your point, I mean, I use that example because that's the example you always kind of hear on the
Yeah.
streets. But also to your point, this is not about pricing people out.
Yeah.
You know, this is not about making it so expensive that only, out of town developers can afford to come to Mobile. It's about empowering the local citizens who own these buildings to renovate them and to encourage them to find tenants, because the last thing we want to do is create a system where the local business community cannot afford to live and work and play in downtown.
That's correct.
So to your point, that's exactly why we want to make sure these fees are a little bit lower. So there's some other smaller cities like Shreveport we've looked at, Chattanooga, cities that have implemented these kind of programs in the last 10 years that we've really been able to look at for best practices and see what worked, what didn't. It's not South Carolina, but even Charleston, West Virginia is another city that we looked at, which is smaller than Mobile, but theirs has been very effective.
Okay.
So we've tried to look kind of nationwide to find exactly what works.
So in the state of Alabama, Birmingham has something similar to this.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is their price structure? Is it?
It's actually quite similar. Yeah,
Okay.
It is similar. And I'll tell you, New Orleans has one as well. Now theirs, of course, is a little bit higher, but that's a different animal. That's why I'm glad you brought that up. We're not comparing this to a city twice our size, or maybe with a central business district that's 5 times our size. We're trying to make this work within the parameters of what we have. And that's something, if you look at the support that we've received for this in writing, you should have all received letters, not only from the Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Alliance, and the MHDC, because they agree that this strategy will work.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Go ahead.
And Stephen, this is similar to what you're talking about. The other side of kind of what we've been talking about is not trying to keep people from coming in and wanting to develop properties, but we are trying to prevent people from coming in, purchasing properties and sitting on them for years and years and years because they can't afford to do anything. They don't have the wherewithal. And maybe they think one day I might have some money and I'll do it eventually and just let it sit there forever and ever. So you want to stop that.
The land play.
Yeah. I'm going to sit
tactic.
on it until prices go up and then maybe I'll sell it. And in the meantime, everybody suffers. So there's got to be that middle ground somewhere so that there's some incentive to make people do something with their properties, but not make it so expensive and so costly for people who are planning to do it, are doing it little by little and making progress. You want to incentivize them to do that and not stop that. But again, we have so many folks who we've heard over the years, like, no, I'm waiting for a good price, or, it's my property. I'll do whatever I want. And if it sits there, well, okay, but I'll eventually do something with it,
And, we talked about public responsibility, personal responsibility and public
Right.
safety. So let's think about all of the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been put into downtown by responsible owners of their
Yeah.
properties. It is not advantageous to say, come to our downtown, where if you buy a property, your neighbor can be derelict without a fire alarm system and with no consequences of ever developing their land.
Right.
That's a discouraging way to increase economic development.
Yeah. I mean, I just think if we can find that middle ground, with not making it so costly that people just refuse to come and even take a chance on Mobile, but at the same time to protect everybody, to make it so that they know they actually have to do something. They can't just sit on these properties. I think that's the important thing.
Ben,
We have the cheapest property tax in the country. I
We
mean,
do.
it's an incentive in itself.
doing something downtown.
Well, yeah, Ben, remember that, and I made the statement last time. Alabama's land right city, and our Constitution of 1901 was based on land ownership as opposed to revenue, and that's why if you look at our city, our properties were taxed by the frontage that it fronted on the street for years. That's why if you go down Government Street, some of these streets that have real prominent owners, you see wide houses. But when you look at other properties, the lots were narrow and deep because they were taxed by the frontage of property. And also the land was protected because of the farmers and the things that they did. So we were a property right state. We have some of the lowest property taxes in the United States, but our state income tax is some of the highest too to offset that. So that's why our property rights laws are so important. But to get to the point is that, like I told y'all last week, we're going to have to do something. And I think that the council can address the fee schedule to maybe lighten the fee schedule or get it to a way that it may be somewhat comfortable. But to do something to encourage whatever we're going to do downtown, to encourage economic development, we're going to have to do it, but also to protect the life safety issue. We're going to also have to do something about that before we get to the end of it.
I got a question about this 99 unit building that was brought up.
That's occupancy. That's,
99 or 90
hold on.
occupancy is 99, whatever it is, and it's apparently snagged in some planning issue. If something's snagged in a planning issue, then that means that owner or developer's got to pivot to something else. Something's got to provoke them to pivot to something else. I'm good with this, as it's written. I think there's adequate outs here, especially with somebody that puts together a plan and says, this is what our plan is, this is what we're going to do. And there's, this reasonable discretion that would have to be given. There's enough there to say, okay, this is a real developer who's got a real plan and they're taking real action towards, an end. I think there's enough discretion in there to allow that to take place without being punitive. It was interesting about the rebate idea. I mean, you can't give it all back towards that particular development, I would say, because then you just put your money in there and you got it all coming back to you. But if there's a sort of buy down on that rebate over time, where once you reach $10,000 worth of fine, you can recoup 1,000 of it or 2,000 of it at the end of the day. Maybe that's an idea or a thought.
You've got to spend a lot of money up front, which will get sent back because you proceeded quickly and got the project completed.
So I will address that issue and a couple of others, but Mr. Reynolds actually helped create the earmark for how this would be able to go back into the owner's pocket with the TIF. This money, based on the amendment that he suggested during our sit-down meeting, will be segregated into a specific account for the rehab and administering both the staff side and making sure that the facade grants are picked up. And all of these owners within the loop would be eligible for that. And so that's actually a really good amendment, and we thank you for it. We've accepted, I think, 90% of the amendments that you all have talked about. And so I don't think that any have been rejected, but they were just kind of withdrawn. I do want to say this. If I was advising somebody on how to kill this ordinance or make it a toothless tiger, I would attack the fee schedule, because that is where we really promote the enforcement. You have to think about, and I think Mr. McNair is way too modest to say so, but he's probably been involved in more redevelopment within the confines of the city of Mobile, historic and otherwise, than any two people combined in this building. He helped rehab City Hall North and a number of other areas. And so he and Flo Kessler worked on this particular ordinance for quite some time. It ranges back to 2 years ago, right before the Hoffman building caught on fire. And that's really when it literally lit a fire up under us, pun intended. We're looking to not penalize developers, but to create a real incentive to move forward and not have the people who, some by no fault of their own, have recently acquired property, and that's not a problem, but some for years, for the last 20 years, as Ms. Gregory mentioned, have held on to buildings and thumbed their noses at the city and their neighbors for quite some time. We don't have to say their names. We know who we're talking about. But that's really the push. And I think that's why so many people are so supportive of it. And this is possibly the least strenuous way to do so. Another thing I'll compliment you, as a city, we have a number of best practices, but we're behind on this. You've got one of the best fire departments in the country with ISO 1 and certified. And you also have one of the best blight remediation programs in the country. I think President Small and some others have gone to the League of Cities and talked about how innovative it is. So there's a lot of good tools that we have in the box, but we need this tool to be able to create a forcing function in downtown. Otherwise, if we change this too much, if we water it down too much, we'll get what we've always had, and we'll keep those buildings for another 20 years.
My only concern or the only thing that came to mind was, I guess when it comes to code, obviously there's fire code, there's build code. And then I guess just for clarification standpoint, and I don't know if it's a David question or not, or with code knowledge, getting power to the building and then getting power from the meter to the monitoring station. I mean, we're not going to have to, all these buildings, they're not, whoever the owner isn't going to have to come in and entirely rip out all the old electrical and bring it up to code. I mean, there's ways that we can waive just for, I guess, that one circuit or that one run, I guess. Is that kind of what that conversation was earlier, is that we can not have to worry about bringing the whole entire building up to code. We can.
No, based on what was discussed here, it's temporary poles. It's power systems through solar, as long as it's approved with the fire department. I think we'll be satisfied. Now, you're right, though, that some cases with a temporary pole, you will need electrical permit, and it will need to go through Build Mobile for that permit, and then the fire department for the final system.
David, with all temporary poles, there's a permit required. That's why I didn't have a headache with it, with all permit.
That is correct.
With all
That's my
temporary
understanding
poles.
as well, but I just
Right.
wanted to bring that up to Mr. Woods, that yes, there's multiple departments that would be involved, but specifically electrical for that temporary pole.
There's also appeals, there's several layers of appeals where they can appeal to the building director, whoever it is. And then if that doesn't go your way, you can appeal to the city council. And then if that doesn't go your way, you can appeal to the circuit court. So there's the appeal process. If you don't like the decision, there's several appeals you can go through.
I didn't quite follow that, but I guess if it fails with the council, they can appeal to circuit court, just like the regular rule states in nuisance abatement.
Yeah, so there's a building official,
Right.
and then there's a building director, and then there's the city council, and then there's the circuit court.
CJ?
You go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of this. Downtown is the heart of the city. I mean, it's where it's beat at, but we just cannot forget the arteries, and that's the neighborhoods. I can't stress this enough. We just need more enforcement, in our neighborhoods, because again, we building 200,000 out of houses in the neighborhood, and right next door is, blight. So I mean, again, I'm very supportive of this, but we just cannot forget our neighborhoods.
I think we started out there and they asked us to make this area a test area.
So just an observation, a lot of the conversation today had to do about a developer, and all of a sudden he's hit with additional $10,000 in cost. If you fast forward, let's say you pass this, and so 18 months from now, a developer comes in and he wants to buy a building, because you've already passed it, he knows that is a carrying cost going forward. The property owner knows he's got a carrying cost going forward also. And so instead of holding out for the last dollar, he's saying, I can't afford this $10,000. I don't want to, hold it for another year. So there's a chance he's going to cut that cost. My point is that you're going to change the market dynamics of this. And so that will hopefully help move the properties. But going back to what Mr. Woods said, if we do the pricing too low, then people will just continue to sit there. Another story I will tell you is several years ago, we were trying to get cruise ships back and all, had an opportunity to take the president of the cruise line downtown. And let me say this, I was fired up about downtown. We had opened 3 or 4 new restaurants and things were vibrant. This was pre-COVID. And they wanted to go down Dolphin Street, the entertainment district. And of course, really in my mind's eye, I was thinking of all this activity that you see downtown. Well, when we started riding down and they're sitting in the passenger seat and we started passing blighted building after blighted building after blighted building, I mean, my insides hurt saying this is embarrassing. And so, I think everybody in here agrees, we've got to do something. Otherwise, you will never have a great downtown. Just an observation.
William, I do want to tell you that I agree with what Councilman Small said, though, too. I know we're looking at downtown now, and I appreciate that, and I'm supportive of that. Next, though, we need to start looking toward the residential areas and what we can do to get people who leave their properties in the situation that they're in. Now, they may board them up because we make them board them up, but they still look awful and brings down the entire rest of the neighborhood. The yards are grown up and weeds growing all over the houses. The windows are boarded for the most part, but the rest of it looks awful. And it doesn't encourage anybody to come in and purchase any of these properties, and the heirs, most of whom are out of town generally, we can't get them to do anything. So there's got to be a way that we can move forward and improve our neighborhoods as well, because there are just too many of them that just sit there and bring the entire area down. If we can do this in downtown, we got to find a way to do them in the residents as well, residential areas.
So on the current budget for the new fiscal year, y'all approved to add 2 more enforcement officers to do exactly what you're talking about. We've also taken the municipal enforcement officers that do public right-of-ways, move them over into code enforcement. And they are within the next couple of weeks, you're going to see amendments to ordinances to allow us to do debris as well as weedling on these houses. And you'll also see one for the tire czars so that we can address the tire issue as well. And so I think you're going to see quite a bit of movement in those areas that you're most concerned about.
But we also need them to take some sort of action on the houses themselves. Either
On the
demolish
property owners.
them or renovate them, do something with them rather than letting them sit there.
And that's correct. That's the 2
Yeah.
additional enforcement officers that we're bringing in to deal strictly with residential structure.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And I agree with Councilman Smiles and Councilmember Gregory. This is just a suggestion because I know we got to do this, but going forward, we had a situation in my district where it was a blighted property. The city is still got to go through the whole process, cutting the grass. We doing all this, and it was a lien on the property. If we can, a lot of times the owners are not selling the property because there's a lien on the property. They're not gonna, and the lien is more than what the property worth. So I think if we can get a program in place to start promoting, maybe removing, if the owner is ready to sell the property, to remove the lien so they can sell it and put a program in place for that. I think, and then start creating some development. I think that could be a major piece to create some change in our communities.
We have a program. It's not widely used, not widely publicized because the owner a lot of times doesn't want to sell. What we don't want to do is enrich the problem owner. But if they're trying to sell the property, the person acquiring the property can apply to us to see if we can forgive part of that lien to get it down to where it's break even. When you do that, though, the seller doesn't make a profit and they hold the property a lot of times. But if it's in a redevelopment area, we can do that administratively. If it's not, those come back before council. We've done about a handful in the last 5 or 6 years.
I think we need to focus on it, and I think it need to be a program and pushing developers because the owners, they're not going to sell it when they know they're not going to make any money. That's just a suggestion, not a direct. Thank you.
That one ask on the temporary poll, if we did add that amendment also, Paul, have you made that note already? Okay, Ben, I've read most of your amendments from last week and also the 3 that I asked for. I see that some of that language is there. I wasn't really clear on the language about Mr. McNair's add about that one sentence there, I think it needed to be a whole lot clearer for those of us that don't read like that or have that in it, that as far as scheduling goes and how that works. I think it needs to be clear if an owner or developer or whoever wants to develop submits his schedule of timeline and repair to the city, that it would suffice. That the same way we do for nuisance abatement, how we come in, we submit the schedule, the time frame, the dates, and all that stuff. I think that would be a whole lot clearer than what's there right now. But other than that, I think we've gotten everything. Are we all in agreement of all the amendments that we've seen? Did you have something else to? You wanted to say something. You came to the mic.
I'll talk to the representative, Mr. Penn after the meeting. It was about the auction process for legal properties.
Okay. All right, we're all good. Anyone else from the city? All right, Mr. Townsend, you clear everything clear now? Hope to see that mattress factory building redeveloped very soon. As quick as you can, man. Take your time with it. Appreciate y'all. We're dismissed.
So I want to make sure I've got this